They thought they were attacking a defenseless woman in a wheelchair, but after just a few minutes, things didn't go according to plan. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and write in the comments what city you're from. The sun burned low over the horizon, casting the Arizona desert in a molten haze. A warm wind stirred the dust off the crumbling roadside, whispering along the cracked asphalt of State Route 94, where the speed limit signs leaned like weary sentinels over a road few traveled anymore. The world had forgotten this place, and those who remained preferred it that way. It was a town unnamed on most modern maps, a dot buried in the sands of time, where silence lived loud and memory grew heavy like rust on iron. At the edge of this forgotten stretch sat a relic of an America long gone, an old gas station, half swallowed by sun and time. Its roof sagged in the middle. The neon sign above the door blinked weakly with the letter O in open, long since dead. The gas pumps looked like museum pieces, chipped and peeling, their price indicators stuck at some bygone era of low octane. A faint tune played from an old radio inside the office, static warbling through some country melody no one had asked for. It was late afternoon when she arrived. The van pulled in slow, tires crunching on gravel. From the passenger side, the door opened, and out came a wheelchair, lowered gently by the lift. A woman followed, older, mid-50s, wearing loose khaki pants and a denim button-up shirt. A wide-brimmed hat shielded her face from the sun, and tinted glasses concealed her eyes. Her movements were methodical as she adjusted the straps on her legs and wheeled herself forward with a quiet strength that went unnoticed. No one paid her attention at first. The station owner, a weathered man named Miguel, who had lived through 3 generations of regret, watched her from behind the dusty counter, expression unreadable. He offered no greeting. In a town like this, strangers meant questions, and questions brought consequences. He looked away and pretended to busy himself with something beneath the register. She moved slowly through the convenience store, inspecting items on the shelves, some fresh, most stale. Her fingers lingered over a can of chili, then a packet of instant coffee. She didn't say a word. Everything she did had a weight to it, a rhythm almost too smooth for someone just passing through. But there was nothing extraordinary about her, not at first glance. Just another broken figure on wheels in a world that didn't stop for people like her. Outside, the wind picked up as the sound of engines tore through the dry silence. 5 motorcycles rumbled onto the gravel lot, coughing black smoke, their chrome frames glinting like fangs in the sun. They didn't slow down gently. They announced their arrival with reckless brakes and revving engines, spinning small clouds of dust into the air. The men who rode them looked exactly like they belonged to this land. Sun-leathered faces, arms wrapped in tattoos, and eyes that had long since given up pretending to be human. They called themselves the Black Dogs. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with greasy black hair tied back in a short ponytail, was the first to dismount. His name was Bruce Reynolds, but most knew him only as Jackal. His boots hit the ground with a thud as he stepped off the bike and stretched, scanning the lot like a wolf sniffing for weakness. The others followed, forming a loose half-circle as they leaned against their bikes and lit cigarettes. Jackal's gaze eventually fell on the woman in the wheelchair. "Well, well," he drawled, voice thick with smoke and boredom. "Looks like we've got ourselves a visitor." His men chuckled, low and cruel. One of them, George Stinger Hanks, tossed his cigarette to the ground and strolled forward, wiping his hands on his jeans like he was about to touch something filthy. The woman had just exited the store, small brown paper bag on her lap, and was adjusting something on her left wheel when he approached. "Need help, sweetheart?" he sneered, squatting slightly to get on her level. His breath reeked of beer and tobacco. "I got strong hands. Real gentle, too." She said nothing. Her head was slightly bowed, her shoulders relaxed, face obscured beneath her wide-brimmed hat. "Oh, she's shy," Jackal called from behind. "Come on, give her a proper welcome." Stinger grinned and reached out, gripping her shoulder with mock tenderness. The moment his fingers closed, her body stiffened slightly, barely a tremor, but her eyes flickered up behind the sunglasses, catching his reflection in the window. Cold, measured, unblinking. Stinger didn't see it. He chuckled and leaned in closer. Behind him, another one, Billy Trench Kohler, walked over and snatched the bag off her lap. "Let's see what Grandma's buying. Probably cat food and painkillers." The paper bag tore, spilling a can of beans and a chocolate bar onto the dirt. The woman's hands twitched slightly, as if in reflex, then fell still. Jackal stepped closer, amusement painting his face. "Damn shame, being stuck like that out here. Tell you what, darling, we'll make sure you get a ride somewhere real nice." With one hand, he casually spun her chair to face him. The sudden movement was jarring. One wheel lifted and her torso swayed before settling. She looked up at him, head tilted like she was trying to focus, her lips parting slightly. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." Jackal leaned in, placing his hand on the back of her chair. "Don't what? Don't touch you? Don't be rude? Don't treat you like everyone else does?" He snorted. "Lady," he said low and smug, "you should be thanking us. We're the only action you've seen in years." The others roared with laughter, snapping phone pictures, egging him on. Trench stepped back, pulling out his phone to film. Another, Deke Crank Monson, spun the can of beans on the ground with his boot. Jackal's grip tightened. He leaned in close enough for her to smell the rot behind his gold tooth. Then it happened. With a flick of his wrist, Stinger tipped the chair. She spilled to the ground like a rag doll, her palms slapping against gravel, her hat falling off, sunglasses clattering a few inches away. Silence. No one moved. Then someone laughed, a short barking sound, followed by another. "Oops," Jackal muttered. "Somebody needs one of them life alert bracelets." The laughter resumed, louder this time, crueler. She didn't look at them. She didn't cry. She stayed there for a few long moments, breathing through her nose, body trembling just enough to sell the illusion. One hand crawled toward her overturned chair. Another reached toward the bag, now soaked in dust. Miguel peeked through the window of the gas station but quickly turned away. He knew better. Eventually, the black dogs lost interest. They climbed back onto their bikes, tossing one-liners and insults over their shoulders. Jackal lingered a moment longer, looking down at her as if trying to decide whether to push things further. Then he shrugged and turned away. The engines roared back to life. Gravel flew. The sound of their laughter faded into the wind as they peeled off, disappearing in a plume of dust down the highway. Only after the silence returned did she move. She reached calmly into her pocket and pulled out a small device no bigger than a key fob. With one press, a soft chime sounded, and the sunglasses nearby lit faintly at the edge. Recording mode confirmed. She retrieved them, then rolled onto her side and slowly climbed back into the chair with calculated slowness. Her face was different now, set in stone. The lines around her mouth had hardened. Her eyes behind dark lenses shimmered not with fear, but with pure, methodical focus. The can of beans rolled to a stop against her footplate. She picked it up, brushed it off, and placed it carefully back in the bag. Then, with a final glance down the road where the black dogs had vanished, she turned and wheeled herself back to the van. Once inside, with the doors closed and the world sealed out, she removed the glasses and slid them into a docking cradle on the dashboard. The embedded chip immediately began uploading the footage. She leaned back, wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, and exhaled deeply. 5 of them, she murmured. Jackal, Stinger, Crank, Trench, one new one, maybe patched in recently. Her voice was steady, clinical, not angry, not shaken, like someone taking inventory. She opened a side panel near the armrest, revealing a tablet built into the frame. A map appeared, red dots clustered over southern Arizona, marked with photos, dates, and tags. She added 5 new entries. Then she zoomed out. Over 24 markers now filled the screen, all part of a web that spanned hundreds of miles. She wasn't just collecting names. She was hunting. And the black dogs had just wandered into the wrong part of the desert. The desert darkened behind the windshield as the van rolled slowly through the low hills east of the gas station. The twilight sky was painted in bruised purples and fading gold, casting long shadows across the dry earth. The tires moved almost silently along the dirt road that wound its way through empty country, lined with creosote bushes and skeletal trees. The world felt still, suspended between heat and cold, day and night, the past and what was coming. Inside the van, it was cooler, the air humming from a silent climate system, the interior bathed in soft blue light from hidden panels. Louisa Mays sat in the driver's seat, both hands resting on her lap, eyes fixed ahead, though she hardly saw the road. The van practically drove itself, guided by the navigation she had programmed months earlier. Her mind wasn't in the present. It was halfway between memory and calculation, her fingers occasionally twitching as if flipping invisible switches, running scenarios, building possibilities in her head. Beneath the floor, the wheels of her custom chair locked into the track system, giving her full control of the cockpit. A soft vibration beneath her seat confirmed the secure lock. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The footage from the gas station played silently on a monitor embedded in the dashboard. Her voice recordings, taken from the directional mic in the sunglasses, were being transcribed in real time, names highlighted in red as they were detected. Algorithms sorted through the background noise, identifying license plates, face shapes, body language patterns, speech quirks. Every byte of data was being collected, analyzed, and cataloged. A small green light blinked next to a recessed compartment above the windshield. She tapped it once, and the voice that answered was mechanical, calm, and clipped. Connection established. Do you wish to transmit today's report? No, she said softly. Store it local, offline only. Understood. The van reached the end of the path and turned into a narrow gravel driveway, disappearing into a wall of trees. What looked like nothing more than an abandoned farmhouse nestled into the hillside emerged from the brush. Its wooden siding was sun-bleached and weathered, the roof partially rusted, windows smeared with desert dust. There were no lights visible from the outside, no signs of life. But beneath the surface, a very different world existed. The moment the van rolled past the outer fence, hidden sensors activated, scanning the vehicle. A low chime sounded, and the gate retracted silently into the ground. She drove forward until she reached a small ramp leading to a covered carport that looked as if it might collapse under its own weight. As the wheels stopped, a low hum passed through the floor. "Welcome home, Louisa," the AI said again. "Security scan complete. No tracking signatures detected. open platform, she instructed. The floor beneath her shifted with a smooth hydraulic sigh. A moment later, her chair detached from the locking rig and lifted slightly as the door beside her opened. The ramp deployed automatically, unfolding into place as she turned and wheeled herself out into the cool night air. She moved toward the house without haste, the motion practiced, natural. The wood of the porch creaked beneath her wheels, but only slightly. It had been reinforced beneath the surface years ago. Every aspect of this property had. The disabled ramp was hidden beneath a retractable panel, the stairs made to collapse inward at the push of a button, the windows made of ballistic glass behind dust-fogged panes. It looked like a wreck. That was the point. She entered through the front door, which required a retinal scan and a voice phrase before clicking open. The inside of the house was dim, nearly dark, until her chair passed through the threshold and triggered the lighting protocol. Soft illumination rose from recessed panels along the ceiling and floor, painting the interior in a pale white glow. The living room was spare, functional, bookshelves lined with real paper volumes, a wood stove long cold in the corner, an empty couch facing a blank wall. The air smelled faintly of metal, dry electronics, and ozone. Louisa continued forward, bypassing the living space entirely. She moved down the hallway to a door hidden behind what looked like an antique armoire. It slid aside at her presence, revealing a small lift. She entered, and the platform lowered her into the basement. Downstairs, everything changed. The hidden facility beneath the house had once been an old root cellar. Now it was a hybrid between a laboratory, a surveillance hub, and a tactical command center. Multiple screens blinked to life as she entered. The far wall was covered with maps, digital and paper, highlighting routes, names, supply lines. A large central table displayed a topographical layout of southern Arizona. Red markers blinked slowly across it, like wounded hearts. Her chair slid into a docking station at the center of the room. Mechanical arms extended, linking to her hub ports, beginning diagnostics, charging modules, running security checks. She leaned back slightly, letting the system sync with her internal interface. "Begin vocal log," she said. "Recording," the voice replied. "Subject group Black Dogs intercepted at 1742 local time at Route 94 fuel station. 5 individuals identified. Primary target, Bruce Reynolds, alias Jackal. Affiliations confirmed with known distributor Marcus Drell. Drell previously linked to Operation Hallowtide, the same operation Anna was working before her cover was blown." Her voice faltered slightly on the name. "Anna." She closed her eyes. For a second, the hum of the machines fell away, and she was somewhere else entirely. A street in Albuquerque, evening air, a sound of tires screeching, voices shouting, gunshots, her daughter's voice distorted through a receiver. "It's a setup, Mom. Something's wrong." Then silence. The official story was a gang war gone bad. Anna was caught in the crossfire while conducting routine surveillance. The internal review cleared everyone involved. Evidence was inconclusive. Reports were sealed. But Louisa had read between the lines. She'd spent 20 years designing systems that buried secrets deeper than concrete. She knew when a report had been doctored, and she knew that her daughter hadn't died in a random shootout. She had been silenced. And so Louisa had disappeared, faked a stroke, disconnected from every known account, liquidated assets through ghost brokers, retreated into the backwoods under a different name. Most thought she'd died. That was fine. Dead women didn't raise questions. Over time, she built this: a sanctuary, a war room, a machine with a single purpose: to find the men who killed her daughter and tear out the rot that had let them do it. And now, the faces she'd seen at the gas station, they were part of it. Maybe not the architects, but the hired hands. The ones who pulled triggers and laughed after. The ones who tossed girls into shallow graves and watched the news pretend it never happened. Her eyes opened. "Continue log," she said, "confirmed voice match for George Hanks, alias Stinger. Appeared in intercepted FBP transcripts 6 months prior. Location, Las Cruces. Associated with caravan route used by Drell's group. Indicates continuity in operations across state lines. Cross-reference with Anna's final location. Add tag. Tag applied." Louisa wheeled away from the console and approached the far wall. There, surrounded by surveillance photos, was a single image. Anna Mays, smiling in a dusty jacket, eyes bright behind aviator sunglasses. Louisa reached up and touched the corner of the photo. "I'll find them all," she said. She turned back to the table and pulled up the latest route data. The black dogs had been running weapons, she was certain of it, but they weren't just delivering to local buyers. The map showed something bigger. Small towns strung together by dirt roads, old military depots reactivated in secret, private land purchases connected by shell companies. Someone was rebuilding something. And she intended to find out what. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she reviewed every frame of footage from the encounter, tagging voices, isolating faces, updating threat profiles. Her chair connected to the house's central core, feeding new patterns into the system. The sun rose behind thick curtains, unnoticed. By morning, she had identified 3 of the 5 with 100% certainty, and a 4th with 76%. The last wore mirrored sunglasses that reflected too much light for a clean ID. But it didn't matter. She'd see him again. They always came back. Jackals never strayed far from the carcass. She rolled back to the center of the room, the blue light painting her face like an old soldier back at war. She activated the main console and spoke clearly. "Begin Phase 2. "Confirmed," the voice said. "Location? Gas station Omega. Offline mode. Traps are operational. Surveillance ready." Louisa nodded. "They're going to walk into hell," she said. And then, for the first time in hours, she smiled. Not out of joy, but with the grim satisfaction of a woman who had just marked a date on the calendar and knew exactly what came next. Morning came slowly in the Arizona desert, the first tendrils of light creeping over the horizon, stretching long and thin across the dry earth. The air remained thick with the heat of the previous day, rising from the cracked asphalt and shimmering waves. Even before the sun was fully up, the temperature was climbing. Another scorching day in a town that time had left behind. Inside her underground command center, Louisa Mays barely noticed the shift from night to day. The world above might have moved forward, but down here, time belonged to her alone. Screens glowed softly, their blue light flickering across her face, reflecting off the lenses of her reading glasses. She had been awake for hours, scanning footage, adjusting search parameters, compiling patterns. Every breath, every movement, every careless word from the black dogs was being analyzed, sorted, and cataloged. They thought they had gotten away with their little display at the gas station. They thought they had left her behind, helpless, forgotten. She had spent the better part of her night proving them wrong. A satellite feed refreshed on the primary monitor, showing a stretch of highway leading out of town. Several motorcycles had passed through during the early hours, most irrelevant, but 2 stood out. Jackal's bike and Stinger's heading south toward Tucson. That alone was interesting. The black dogs typically operated within a smaller radius, preferring to keep their supply chains tight and manageable. If they were moving farther out, it meant something bigger was happening. Louisa leaned back slightly, rubbing the bridge of her nose. This wasn't just about a gang running weapons. This was part of something larger, a network that stretched beyond the dusty roads of Arizona. She had known that since the beginning, but each new clue confirmed it. There were too many overlapping routes, too many shared contacts between gangs that had no reason to work together. Someone higher up was pulling the strings, and the black dogs were just one thread in the tapestry. She turned to another screen, where a map of the region was marked with red, yellow, and green indicators. Red for known gang activity, yellow for suspected drop sites, green for neutral locations. A new entry blinked into place. A small, unnamed truck stop about 20 miles south of where Jackal and Stinger had been last seen. Her fingers tapped the edge of the desk as she considered her next move. Surveillance was key. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. Not yet. She needed more information, more leverage. The black dogs operated on arrogance. They assumed no one was watching. That assumption was her greatest advantage. She navigated to another program, a live feed from a drone she had launched earlier. The small, silent craft hovered just outside the truck stop, its thermal imaging picking up the faint heat signatures of bodies moving inside. Two of them stood out, Jackal and Stinger, engaged in what looked like a conversation with a third man. Louisa zoomed in, enhancing the image. The third man wasn't dressed like a biker. His clothes were too clean, his stance too controlled. He had the look of someone accustomed to authority. The way he gestured, the way Jackal and Stinger listened rather than spoke, this was someone in charge. She quickly ran the image through her facial recognition software. Seconds later, a name appeared on the screen. Marcus Drell. Her stomach tightened. Drell wasn't just a weapons distributor, he was a facilitator. He didn't just sell guns, he arranged entire operations, setting up supply chains, ensuring smooth transitions between buyers and sellers. More importantly, he had connections deep inside law enforcement. If he was working with the black dogs, it meant their little gang wasn't just moving small arms. They were a part of something much larger. Louisa exhaled slowly. She navigated to another program, bringing up her notes on Drell. Most of the information she had was pieced together from fragmented reports, redacted government files, and whispers from encrypted channels. He had been on her radar for a while, but this was the first time she had concrete proof that he was working in the region. She tapped her fingers against the armrest of her chair. This changed things. For months, she had been gathering information on the black dogs, tracking their movements, documenting their supply lines. But this was bigger than them. This was an opportunity. If she played it right, she could take down more than just a gang of low-level thugs. She could dismantle an entire network. Her mind shifted gears. She turned to another screen where a live feed showed the gas station she had recently purchased under a false identity. It was a perfect trap, an isolated location, seemingly abandoned, but equipped with enough surveillance equipment to track every movement within a mile radius. It was time to set the bait. Louisa activated a pre-programmed script. A message was sent through an anonymous account, directed to one of the black dog's lower-tier members. The message was simple. A shipment of rare motorcycle parts had just arrived at the station, parts that certain buyers would pay top dollar for. It wasn't a direct invitation, but it was enough to pique their interest. Now, all she had to do was wait. She moved away from the desk, rolling toward a cabinet near the far wall. It opened with a quiet click, revealing a collection of equipment: modified surveillance tools, encrypted communication devices, a carefully arranged selection of defensive weapons. She took a moment to assess, then selected a small, custom-built device resembling an ordinary key fob. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a trigger. One press, and the entire gas station would go into lockdown. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in her palm. She wasn't reckless. She didn't act on impulse. Every move she made was calculated, deliberate. But there was something deeply satisfying in knowing that she had control, that the black dogs, and everyone like them, would never see her coming. She placed the device in the side compartment of her chair and returned to the main console. The drone feed showed that Jackal and Stinger were leaving the truck stop. Louisa smiled faintly. They had taken the bait. She watched as their bikes roared back onto the highway, heading straight for the station. She turned to another screen where the interior of the building was displayed from multiple angles. The doors were unlocked. The lights were dim. Everything looked normal. She leaned back slightly, watching. A hunter waits. A predator does not rush. She exhaled softly, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the tension settle into something calm, something steady. They thought they had power. They thought they were in control. She had spent years letting people think that. By the time they realized the truth, it would be far too late. Louisa opened her eyes. And then she waited. The trap had already been laid. Now it was only a matter of time before the prey wandered in, drawn by the scent of opportunity and the same overconfidence that had carried them through 100 towns like this one. Louisa knew their kind. She had studied them with the same precision she once applied to weapon systems and sensor matrices, every behavior cataloged, every weakness underlined. Predictable, aggressive, impulsive men with too much power and not enough sense to recognize danger when it was smiling at them from a distance. It wasn't that they lacked caution entirely. They were just wired to believe that anything not standing tall with a weapon drawn couldn't possibly pose a threat. And if there was one thing Louisa had learned in the years since her daughter's death, it was that underestimation was the most reliable lever in any war. From her command center, she tracked the movement of Jackal and Stinger as they crossed into the outer surveillance radius of the abandoned gas station, now marked in her system as Omega Site. A low chime sounded when their bikes tripped the first motion alert, a pair of green dots sliding across a topographical overlay on her screen. They'd brought 2 more with them. That was expected. Jackal rarely moved without a buffer, and Stinger wouldn't have returned to the same place where he'd assaulted a woman the day before without backup. That wasn't guilt. That was cowardice disguised as strategy. Louisa watched their approach with the calm detachment of a biologist observing test subjects in a controlled environment. The station looked exactly as it had during their previous visit. Dust-covered windows, dim interior lighting, and a single pump with a flickering display. The vending machine outside had been restocked with expired energy drinks and bags of stale chips. The soda cooler buzzed, half filled with water bottles. Her own van was nowhere in sight. She had parked it nearly a mile away and taken one of the all-terrain drones into position to monitor the lot from ground level. Every square inch of the property was under surveillance. She could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their heads turned in brief arcs, scanning for signs of trouble. But their body language still broadcasted arrogance. They didn't sense her presence. And that meant everything was going according to plan. Jackal killed the engine first, swinging his leg off the bike with a grunt. He adjusted the chain around his neck and looked up at the cracked awning of the station. Stinger followed, already striding toward the front door with the casual swagger of someone who believed himself untouchable. The other two hung back by the bikes, keeping half an eye on the road and half on the building. They'd clearly been instructed to stay alert, but Louisa could already see the fatigue behind their eyes, the boredom setting in. She pressed a key on her console, activating the passive engagement protocols. Nothing overt. No sounds, no lights. Just a slight adjustment in air pressure within the interior, enough to trigger subtle disorientation if they stayed long. A background frequency emitted from hidden speakers would start cycling, tuned to a pitch known to induce mild anxiety. Another click triggered a microdose of a scentless chemical compound used in psychological warfare, imperceptible to the human nose, but enough to elevate heart rates over time. These weren't weapons. Not yet. These were tools of pressure. The point wasn't to destroy. The point was to watch what cracks formed under strain. Jackal stepped inside first. The security cameras caught his expression as he looked around. Disappointment, maybe. Confusion. Stinger followed, moving toward the counter and lifting a cardboard box left there as part of the set dressing. He opened it, frowning at the tangle of motorcycle parts inside. Real, but useless. Damaged beyond repair, deliberately so. The exact kind of bait that said too good to be true to anyone paying attention. But Stinger didn't think that way. He turned, calling to Jackal, who waved him off and began exploring the back shelves. Louisa let them settle in. Then she pressed another button. A faint click echoed from the front door as the magnetic locks engaged. Jackal turned immediately, his posture shifting as he crossed the floor in 2 long strides. He tried the handle. It didn't budge. He cursed and looked over his shoulder, barking something Louisa couldn't hear. She didn't need to. His body said it all. She activated the mics and turned up the gain. "What the hell is this?" Jackal muttered, slamming his palm against the door. "Was this place locked yesterday?" Stinger stepped beside him. "It wasn't. I checked. It was wide open. Thought you said the owner was gone." He was. Place looked like it hadn't been touched in months. Jackal narrowed his eyes and looked toward the security camera mounted near the ceiling. It was disguised, of course, but there were always tiny tells, just enough to make someone wonder if they knew what to look for. "This feels wrong," Jackal said. "Get the boys inside." Louisa smirked. Of course he would. False confidence was a hard habit to break. The 2 bikers outside approached the building slowly, weapons now visible at their hips. One pulled the door. It didn't move. Jackal barked orders again. Moments later, one of them pulled a crowbar from his bike and approached a side window. Louisa watched silently as he jammed it into the edge and began to pry. She waited until the pane gave way with a crack, then hit the secondary command. The lights inside flickered once and died. Total darkness swallowed the building. The screens she watched turned grayscale, switching to night vision. In the video feed, Jackal's face turned toward the ceiling, as if listening for something. Stinger cursed and pulled out a flashlight. Then the speakers came online. Not words, not noise. A low-frequency tone designed to bypass conscious hearing and travel straight into the primitive parts of the brain. It wasn't painful. Not yet. But within minutes it would become impossible to ignore. The man at the window recoiled, pulling back as an invisible burst of electromagnetic interference caused his crowbar to spark against the sill. He shouted, dropping the tool, then cursed again as he stumbled back. Jackal moved toward the back door. Locked. "Okay," he said, voice low. This ain't no accident. This is a goddamn setup." He turned toward Stinger. "She's playing us." "What?" "The old woman from yesterday." Stinger blinked, then scoffed. "Come on, man. You think a cripple set all this up?" Louisa's fingers hovered over another switch. One more press. From a hidden panel near the ceiling, a sudden plume of dense white smoke billowed out across the ceiling. Harmless, non-toxic, but thick enough to disorient. The flashlight beams began bouncing wildly off the suspended particles. Louisa zoomed in on Jackal's face. The calculation was back now. He was scared. Not panicked, but close. She turned on the speaker. Just a single phrase. "You shouldn't have touched me." Jackal froze. Stinger spun around, sweeping the room with his light. Louisa said nothing else. Silence returned. The two men began shouting, commands to one another, threats to whoever might be listening. The other bikers outside tried again to open the front door. Nothing gave. And then, finally, she triggered the exit. The emergency locks disengaged. The front door popped open with a hiss, just long enough for the four men to bolt outside. Louisa let them. She wanted them to leave. She wanted them to go back to wherever they roosted and tell their friends that something was wrong, that someone was watching, that the woman they thought they humiliated had let them walk away, because fear was the fertilizer of recklessness, and she needed them reckless. She watched as they climbed onto their bikes and peeled out of the lot, leaving behind only the sound of spinning tires and a thin trail of dust. Louisa sat back, her hands folded. The data from the encounter was already being logged. Voice samples, stress patterns, reaction times. They had told her more in 20 minutes of surveillance than she'd learned in weeks of passive observation. And most importantly, Jackal had spoken Marcus Drell's name aloud inside the station. The recording was crystal clear. She reached for her comms interface. "Flag it. Send a copy to Vault 3. A soft chime confirmed the command. She didn't need to chase them. Not yet. They'd bring her where she needed to go, and when they did, she'd be ready. They had taken her daughter. She was going to take everything else. The night air smelled of dust and gasoline as Louisa sat in the dim glow of her monitors, watching the black dogs flee. Their bikes tore down the highway, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the darkness, leaving behind nothing but a swirl of disturbed earth and the faintest trace of their scent. They were running, but not far. Not yet. The human mind had a funny way of handling fear. It could be suppressed, rationalized, ignored for a time, but it never truly disappeared. And when men like them felt that cold hand close around their throats, they didn't retreat. They attacked. She had seen it in Jackal's eyes when the lights had gone out. It wasn't just anger that had settled into the lines of his face. It was something deeper, something hungry. His mind had already been working the problem, trying to turn his fear into dominance. That was how men like him survived. He would go back to his people, tell them what happened, spin it into something manageable. Maybe they'd laugh, call it a freak accident, blame faulty wiring. But somewhere in the part of his brain that still clung to reason, he'd know the truth. And that truth would fester. It would gnaw at him until the only way to silence it was to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was nothing, that she was weak, that she had no power here. Louisa turned away from the screen and exhaled slowly, her fingers drumming once against the armrest of her chair. She knew what was coming. Retaliation. They wouldn't let this slide. Jackal wasn't the type to let even the smallest slight go unanswered, especially in front of his men. His authority had been challenged. That meant he had to respond. It was only a question of how. She wheeled toward the far side of the room where a row of locked compartments lined the wall. With a press of her palm against the biometric scanner, the steel casing slid open, revealing the carefully arranged contents within. A selection of weapons, most of them modified for quick, single-handed access. A set of encrypted comm devices. Tactical gear that had taken her years to perfect. Streamlined, efficient, built for someone who had long since adapted to a world that saw her as broken. She selected a compact sidearm first, a custom-built pistol with a grip molded specifically for her hand. Not the kind of weapon she preferred to use, but insurance was never a bad thing. Next, a small, palm-sized drone. She activated it with a flick of her wrist, watching as its tiny rotors hummed to life, lifting it smoothly into the air. It hovered beside her, awaiting input. She tapped a command into the side of her chair, syncing the drone's feed to her interface. A second later, the small screen embedded in her armrest came to life, displaying a real-time map of the town. A few keystrokes and the drone was on its way, slipping through a narrow ventilation shaft and out into the open air. She followed its progress as it soared above the abandoned gas station. Its night vision optics scanned the empty lot before drifting towards the distant glow of the main road. The black dogs were heading south. That much was expected. They'd go back to their usual haunts, regroup, figure out what had just happened. But Louisa wasn't interested in their clubhouse or their drunken excuses. She was interested in their next move. And if her calculations were correct, they'd be heading somewhere else before the night was over. She leaned forward slightly, fingers steady on the controls, guiding the drone lower as it trailed their bikes from a distance. They were slowing now, approaching a turnoff that led away from the highway, down a dirt path barely visible in the darkness. A safe house, maybe. A weapons cache. Whatever it was, they hadn't taken the main road home. That meant they didn't want to be seen. Louisa smirked. Perfect. She let the drone settle into a holding pattern as she switched to another feed. A different drone, already in position. This one hovered near a cluster of low buildings at the edge of town. An old auto shop long since abandoned, its sign faded, its windows dark. But inside, she knew it wasn't empty. She had been watching this place for weeks, tracking the comings and goings of the men who used it as a base of operations. They never stayed long. It wasn't a home, just a waypoint, a place to meet, to trade, to disappear when the law got too close. And tonight, it was about to become the Black Dog's next stop. Jackal's bike was the first to arrive. He pulled up in front of the building, cutting the engine but not getting off. He sat there for a moment, helmet still on, fingers flexing against the handlebars. A minute later, Stinger pulled in beside him, followed by the other two. They dismounted quickly, glancing around, checking their surroundings. Louisa zoomed in. Jackal finally removed his helmet, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair before stepping toward the door. He knocked twice, then stepped back. A pause. Then the door swung open. Marcus Drell stood in the doorway. Louisa's breath stilled. Even through the grainy night vision feed, she could see the tension in Jackal's body, the way he squared his shoulders as if preparing for an argument. Drell, by contrast, was completely still. His arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. She turned up the gain on the microphone. "What the hell was that?" Jackal's voice was low, angry. "You send us on a run to some ghost town, tell us there's a score, and instead we walk into some kind of freak show?" Drell didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice was measured, deliberate. "You think I set you up?" Jackal hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know what to think, man, but something's not right. We get there, the doors lock, the lights go out, and then—" He stopped himself, glancing at the others. He didn't want to say it. He didn't want to admit out loud that a woman in a wheelchair had gotten inside his head. Drell's gaze flicked to Stinger. "You saw it too?" Stinger hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it wasn't normal." Drell exhaled through his nose. "It wasn't an accident." Jackal tensed. Then what was it? Drell leaned against the doorway, his eyes scanning the street. Then he spoke quietly, barely above a whisper. "It was a test." Louisa narrowed her eyes. Jackal stiffened. "A test for what?" Drell didn't answer. He just shook his head. "Get inside. We need to talk." The door shut behind them. Louisa sat back in her chair, heart beating a fraction faster than before. A test. She had expected the black dogs to react with rage, to storm back to the gas station to seek some kind of immediate retaliation. But this was something different. Drell wasn't treating it like an attack. He was treating it like a challenge. Like someone, somewhere, had put a piece on the board and was waiting for him to make his move. She didn't know why. Not yet, but she was going to find out. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, already preparing her next move. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. And whatever game they thought they were playing, whatever test Drell believed he was part of, he was about to learn that Louisa Mays didn't play by anyone's rules but her own. The air was still, too still, as the sun rose sluggishly over the edges of the desert. A faint blush of light crept across the floor of Louisa's command center, slanting through the single reinforced window embedded high in the wall. It barely touched the cold steel of the workstations or the matte black surfaces of the screens, but it signaled the beginning of a new day, one Louisa had already been preparing for long before the first rays reached the earth. She sat in her chair, silent, unmoving, eyes fixed on the central monitor, watching Marcus Drell and Jackal disappear behind the rusted door of the auto shop like men descending into a bunker or a tomb. For the past hour, the drone had hovered above, silent and unnoticed, recording everything. The visuals had little to offer now. The walls of the building were lined with insulation thick enough to block most conventional audio pickups, but Louisa wasn't relying solely on her machines anymore. Sometimes patience worked better than hardware. Sometimes, when people were convinced no one was listening, they spoke too freely. She had planted other ears, much closer than any drone could fly. Back in town, 2 miles from the shop, inside a rusted-out trailer that had once served as a ranger outpost, a man sat alone, nursing a busted jaw and a head full of questions. His name was Kenny Bates, nicknamed Whiskers by the black dogs for the patchy beard he'd been trying to grow since he was 16. He'd started with them as a gopher, running errands, standing lookout, cleaning up after the big boys got too drunk or too angry to manage themselves. He was small-time, barely patched, and easy to overlook. Louisa had noticed him for precisely that reason. 2 weeks ago, she'd staged a fight behind a roadhouse near the eastern county line. 2 men arguing over a stolen bike, escalating into violence. It was loud, messy, and perfectly distracting. While everyone else was drawn to the commotion, Louisa found Kenny in the alley, leaning against the dumpster, high on something cheap and synthetic. She'd approached him from the shadows, whispered his name, and when he'd turned with a start, she'd offered him a single sentence. "You want out, or you want to be the next body dumped in a ditch." He hadn't even hesitated. Now he was hers. He didn't know her name. He didn't know who she was or why she cared about the black dogs. But he knew she had eyes in places she shouldn't, and hands that reached farther than any cop. He'd been feeding her scraps ever since, bits of conversation, locations, habits, soft spots. Tonight, he'd fed her something much better. Time. In the moments after the confrontation at the gas station, Kenny had been nearby, eyes down, listening. He'd heard the talk of Jackal meeting with Drell, and he knew exactly where they were going. He'd sent Louisa the message using the burner she'd given him. Short and direct. Old shop, east side, 3 a.m. Drell's coming, they're rattled. And now, she had them. She turned away from the monitor and rolled across the floor, the hum of her chair blending with the low whir of machines. She passed the storage lockers, the backup servers, the shelves lined with gear she rarely used, until she reached a panel tucked behind the false wall near the far corner of the room. Her fingers brushed over the touchpad, unlocking the door, revealing a small, soundproof chamber lined with matte gray insulation. A single chair sat in the middle of the space, bolted to the floor. A second, smaller monitor faced it from the far wall. This wasn't a torture room. It wasn't for violence. It was for clarity. She had built it after her second year underground, after she realized how many people out there knew pieces of what had happened to Anna. People who'd been too afraid to speak when she was still a name and a face behind a badge. But now, to them, she was a ghost. Someone who could ask questions without worrying about red tape or legal consequences. Someone they could confess to without fearing courtrooms or cell blocks. Confession was a kind of relief, and Louisa had become very good at offering it. She tapped a button on her interface, initiating the retrieval protocol. 10 minutes later, Kenny's voice crackled through the speaker, low and uncertain. "I'm here. You said come before sunup." "You're early," she replied. "That's good." There was a pause. Then, hesitantly, "Did they buy it?" "They bought it." Louisa switched to the main channel. "You're going to do one more thing for me. Then you're done." "I don't know. Jackal's pissed. He's going to start asking questions." "He already is. That's why I need you to confirm what he won't admit." "I told you everything I know." "No," Louisa said. "You told me what you heard. Now you're going to tell me what you saw." Silence again, then a shaky breath. "There's a room," Kenny said at last, "in the shop. They don't use it much. Drell uses it when he's got something to hide. It's got a safe, a bunch of files, maps, I think. Jackal's been in there 3 times this week. I only know because I fixed the damn lock after he busted it last month." "What were they talking about?" "Jackal thinks someone's coming after them, but he doesn't know who. He keeps talking about a shipment. They're moving something big soon. Guns, I guess, not the usual crap, military stuff, black market grade. And animes." Another pause, longer this time. "He mentioned her, a few weeks back. He was drunk, said she was too damn close. Drell got real quiet when he said it. Then he told Jackal to shut up before someone started asking questions again." Louisa's grip on the armrest tightened. "And then?" she asked. "And then nothing. Jackal passed out. Drell left, but I remembered." Louisa wheeled back, ending the transmission. Her heart was steady, her breathing even, but behind her eyes something twisted tight. Too close. They had known. The lie they had sold the Bureau, the story about a firefight gone wrong, had been just that. A story. Anna had stumbled onto something worth killing her over, and they'd buried it under a mountain of paperwork and classified memos. Not anymore. She accessed the satellite feed, zooming in on the auto shop. The roof had a secondary hatch, poorly secured, rarely used. She marked the coordinates and activated Drone 2, redirecting it toward the entry point. Inside, the men were still talking. Jackal paced the floor. Drell leaned against the wall. She couldn't hear them, but she didn't need to. Their body language told her everything. Jackal wanted revenge. Drell wanted control, and both of them were losing their grip. It was time to tip the balance. She typed a new message and sent it to Kenny. Safe, get in, copy everything, drop point Bravo, no delays. He responded 2 minutes later. On it. The drone recorded the moment he slipped into the side door, moving like a shadow through the back hall. The others were too distracted to notice. Jackal slammed his fist against a table. Drell shoved him back. Louisa almost smiled. Kenny emerged from the office 15 minutes later, a small flash drive clenched in his hand. He ducked through the rear entrance and vanished into the night. Louisa tracked him to the rendezvous, confirmed the package, and ended the feed. She had them. Not all of them. Not yet. But enough. She wheeled back to the confession chamber, inserted the drive into the wall port, and brought the contents on screen. Dozens of files, names, routes, purchase orders, shipments, and at the center of it all, Project Sawback. Her daughter's name appeared 6 times across 5 documents. She stared at it for a long time, the familiar sting creeping up the back of her throat. Then she whispered, "I'm going to burn it all down." And this time she meant it. The desert dawn was pale and silent, stretched thin across the hardpan like skin over bone. There was no wind, no sound of insects, no murmur of bird song, only the distant hiss of the warming earth and the echo of something inevitable rising behind the horizon. The world was holding its breath. Somewhere, miles away, the black dogs were stirring, oblivious to how close their ruin had come. Somewhere deeper, in the shadowed cracks of the world they thought they owned, everything was already collapsing. Louisa sat before her central console, her face illuminated by the slow, pulsing red of the master alert. The flash drive Kenny had delivered was still inserted, feeding its secrets into the decryption buffer. Across the screens, pieces of a puzzle long buried began to take shape. Cargo manifests, surveillance photos, shipping route overlays, personnel rosters. All of it cross-referenced and color-coded by an algorithm Louisa had designed herself years ago when her hands were still steady and her heart still unbroken. The name Sawback appeared again and again, bolded in white against a field of black. It had been the code name for a logistics network posing as an interagency collaboration. Just another black-budget operation in a country built on secrets. But now it was the smoking engine at the center of everything. At the heart of Sawback was Marcus Drell. Drell, who had spent a decade moving between federal contracts and corporate advisory boards, always just far enough from the action to avoid oversight. Drell, who had used the black dogs as enforcers, messengers, and disposable shields. Drell, who had known Anna's name long before her assignment in Albuquerque and had marked her for removal the moment she began asking the wrong questions. Louisa knew it now, not as a theory, not as a suspicion, but as fact. The files were clear. Anna had intercepted a transfer manifest that linked Sawback shipments to cartel buyers operating with impunity in the Southwest. She had been preparing to hand the evidence to Internal Affairs when her car was run off the road and the Bureau wrote her death off as incidental collateral. There would be no courtrooms, no jury, no press coverage, only fire. Louisa turned from the screen and reached for the reinforced drawer beneath her desk. Inside was a compact case the size of a lunchbox, secured with a biometric lock and an analog key. She slid the key in first, cold steel, worn at the edges, then pressed her thumb to the pad. The case opened with a soft hiss, revealing a carefully arranged grid of compact explosives, each shaped like a bottle cap, flat and black, each already paired with a transmitter. She counted 12. That would be more than enough. Her fingers moved with precision as she checked each device, her motions steady, unhurried. She had designed them herself years ago, when the work had still been sanctioned and her motives still abstract. Back then, these devices had been theoretical safeguards, meant for worst-case scenarios that bureaucrats didn't like to talk about. Now, they were instruments of justice in the hands of someone who had nothing left to lose. She activated her personal comms and spoke one word. "Bravo." A moment later, a voice replied in a clipped, tense whisper. "Go ahead." "Kenny, I need you out of town." "I figured you might say that." "They'll come looking. They'll know someone helped me." "They'll think it was you," Kenny said. "I'm nobody. Don't bet your life on that." A pause, then. "I got a cousin up in Ruidoso. I'll head there, lay low." Louisa hesitated. "You did good, Kenny." Another pause. "I didn't do it for you." "I know." The line went dead. She stared at the screen for a moment longer before turning back to her equipment. The drone footage showed the auto shop still active, men moving in and out, vehicles arriving, crates being loaded into a large panel truck parked at the side of the building. They were accelerating now, pushing toward whatever came next, hoping to complete whatever transaction Drell had promised before the ground gave way beneath their feet. Louisa watched the crates for a long moment. She didn't need to know what was in them. It was always the same. Military-grade hardware, stolen tech, chemical components, all destined for war zones that had never made the headlines. She closed her eyes. Then she began to move. Everything had been prepared in advance. The van, her rolling base of operations, was already packed and waiting. Modified, reinforced, silent. She docked her chair and rolled into the lift which raised her to ground level, sunlight splashing across the dash as the hatch opened. The desert greeted her with a rush of dry heat. She ignored it, focused instead on the rhythm of her breath, the tension in her spine, the subtle ache that always came when adrenaline began to creep in. Today was the day. She drove without music, without distraction, navigating by memory and instinct. Her mind was filled with blueprints, old recon photos, and the precise layout of the auto shop's interior. She had studied it for weeks, watching from afar. She knew where the loading bay was. She knew where they kept the backup generator. She knew how the ventilation system had been rerouted when they converted the storage room into a communications hub. She had planned this for years without knowing it. Now, all she had to do was act. She arrived at the outskirts just after noon, parking the van behind a ridge and transferring to her secondary chair. This one was leaner, stripped down, better for maneuverability. She packed the explosives into a side compartment, checked her weapon, and activated her portable drone, which lifted into the air with a quiet buzz. It drifted over the ridge and beamed back images of the lot. Half a dozen men outside, 2 on the roof, holding rifles, 1 at the front entrance. She studied their positions carefully, then began her descent. She approached from the south, where the slope gave her partial cover. Her chair's motors were silent at low speed, the rubberized tires designed to move without kicking up dust. By the time the sentry at the west corner glanced her way, she was already within 15 feet of the first breach point. He turned, confused. "What the—" She pressed the trigger. The drone descended on him like a hawk, slamming into the side of his head and discharging a non-lethal pulse that dropped him before he could finish the sentence. She moved quickly, attaching the first device to the fuse box behind the power conduit. The second went beneath the fuel tanks behind the garage. She looped wide, cutting across the back lot, staying low. The second guard on the roof spotted the drone. He raised his rifle, but before he could aim, the drone triggered its flash burst, blinding him with a sudden strobe. He stumbled, firing blindly. Louisa didn't flinch. The shot went wide, and by the time he steadied himself, she was already gone. The third explosive went beneath the truck's engine block, the fourth under the comms tower. She had mapped this place for too long to hesitate. The front door burst open as Jackal stepped out, gun drawn, eyes wild. "Where is she?" he barked. "Where the hell is—" He stopped. Louisa sat in the middle of the lot, motionless, watching him through tinted glasses. "You!" he spat. "Yes," she said. The others spilled out behind him, weapons ready. Drell appeared last, flanked by 2 armed men. He was calmer than Jackal, but only just. He saw the look in Louisa's eyes, and for the first time, recognition flickered there. "Maze," he said, "you're supposed to be dead." "Funny," she said, "so are you." Jackal lifted his gun. "Shoot her," he shouted. "What are you waiting for?" Drell hesitated. "Put the weapon down," Louisa said. "Walk away." "Why would I—" "Because I've wired this entire place," she said, "and because I'm done asking questions." Drell's lips tightened. Jackal stepped forward. "You think you scare us?" "No," she said. "I think you're already dead." And then she pressed the detonator. The first blast took out the comms tower. The second lit the fuel tank. The third disabled the truck's engine with a violent pop. The fourth triggered a chain reaction in the power relay. Panic erupted. The men scattered. Smoke filled the air. Jackal screamed something incoherent as flames engulfed the far side of the lot. Drell turned to run. Louisa drew her weapon and fired once. The bullet caught him in the thigh, sending him to the ground. She rolled forward through the chaos, her chair cutting through the smoke like a blade. Jackal appeared again, staggering, gun raised. She shot him in the arm. He dropped the weapon, howling. "You did this," she said. "You killed her." Jackal fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder. "She was nothing," he screamed. Just a... But Louisa didn't wait for him to finish. She pressed the final charge into his vest and whispered, "Now, so are you." Then she turned away. The explosion behind her was small, clean. By the time the smoke began to clear, Louisa was gone. The rest would come later, the data drops, the leaked evidence, the names. She had more to do, more men to hunt, but today justice had a name, and it had come in a chair. The desert was on fire behind her, but Louisa Mays didn't look back. The wind carried the rising smoke eastward, away from the ruined auto shop and across the endless stretch of pale earth where the scrub lay flat and quiet. The explosions had drawn no sirens, no first responders. Out here, past the edge of the map and far from anything that passed for civilization, silence followed fire like a shadow. The heat shimmered in waves behind her van as she rolled up the ramp into its reinforced belly and sealed the hatch. By the time the flames were visible over the horizon, she was already gone. Inside the van, she moved with the calm precision of someone who had crossed the threshold of no return and found peace waiting on the other side. The shock of confrontation had passed. The adrenaline had faded. Her hands no longer shook. She peeled off her gloves and rested them on the dashboard beside the recovered flash drives and a cracked burner phone that had belonged to Jackal. The screen was still lit, blinking with an unread message. She didn't need to open it. Whatever it said, it no longer mattered. Jackal's voice was silenced, his lies reduced to smoke and broken bone. Louisa reached for the main console and brought the van's systems back online. The dashboard screens flickered, then returned to their default configurations. Satellite positioning, internal diagnostics, network monitoring. A map of the region expanded across the central display, pulsing with red and yellow indicators. Her chair locked into place, syncing with the command interface as the van began to move, tires turning without sound across the desert floor. She didn't need to steer, it knew where to go. She leaned back slightly and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, the darkness behind her lids wasn't filled with Anna's broken voice. There were no phantom screams, no shattered windshield, no cold pavement pressed against her skin. That night had haunted her for so long, burned into her mind like a scar she couldn't hide. But now there was something else, a different memory, just as sharp. Jackal's expression as he realized she wasn't bluffing. The look in Drell's eyes when the first detonation shook the ground. The moment the power shifted. For years, they had built their empire on silence, on the assumption that no one was watching, on the certainty that no one would ever come for them. But someone had, and they hadn't seen her coming. As the van glided over the back roads, Louisa opened the final data file recovered from the safe house. It was encrypted, but the algorithm she had designed unraveled the protections in under a minute. The folder was titled Sawback Contingency. Inside were names, not just gang members or hired smugglers, but bureaucrats, contractors, agents, the very people tasked with oversight. They were the cracks in the dam, those who had looked the other way when shipments were diverted, who had buried inquiries and rerouted investigations. Each one listed with dates, payments, locations. She scrolled through them slowly. Some names she recognized from her time in the field. Others were strangers. But every one of them had helped create the system that had swallowed her daughter and spit out an accident report. She highlighted the list and copied it to a separate drive, locking it behind 3 layers of security. The names would go public, but not yet. Not until the final piece fell into place. The van turned south onto a gravel path flanked by rusted fencing. A cluster of trailers stood at the end, their walls blistered by the sun, their windows shaded. One of them had a flag hanging limp in the heat. Kenny was waiting. Louisa brought the van to a stop behind a line of old tires and opened the side door. The lift extended, and her chair lowered gently to the ground. She moved toward the trailer at a slow, deliberate pace. No rush now, no reason for pretense. Kenny stepped out to meet her. His face was pale, eyes rimmed with red. He hadn't shaved. The burns on his arm were still visible beneath the sleeve of his shirt, wrapped in gauze that had been changed more than once since yesterday. He didn't speak. Neither did she. He handed her a flash drive. "I found this in Drell's bag," he said. "Was going to keep it, but after what happened..." She took it without a word. "They're not all gone, are they?" he asked. "No," she said, "not yet. But it's ending." She nodded. "It's ending." Kenny looked down at the ground, then back up at her. "What happens to me?" "You disappear." He opened his mouth, then stopped. After a pause, he said, "Good." She turned without another word and rolled back toward the van. The flash drive was already in her hand, spinning between her fingers. Another piece, another door. There would always be more. But the hardest part, the first retaliation, The act that broke the illusion of invulnerability, that was done. Back in the van, she reviewed the contents of the drive. It was a contact list, private comms, alias accounts. Some of the numbers were familiar. Others she would have to trace. But one name stood out. Santiago Rivas. Louisa sat very still. Rivas had been Anna's handler, the man who assigned her to Sawback, the man who signed off on the mission that led her to New Mexico. After the incident, he had gone dark, transferred, retired, gone to ground. Louisa had looked for him in the early days, but the trail had gone cold. And now, here he was, buried in Drell's personal files, tied to bank accounts and coded messages. He hadn't vanished. He had been watching. Louisa pulled up a dormant network account and sent a single message through a back channel that hadn't been touched in 3 years. "I know. We need to talk." She didn't expect a reply right away, but it would come. People like Rivas didn't ignore messages like that. They didn't survive long if they did. She turned back to the map and set a new destination. 600 miles east. A safe house in Louisiana. One of hers. Quiet. Hidden. She would need time to prepare. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But the fear was spreading. The rot was being exposed, and the ghost was no longer hiding. As the van rolled back onto the highway, Louisa allowed herself a final glance in the mirror. The scars on her face, the steel in her legs, the faint gray in her hair, none of it looked like the woman she once was. That woman was gone. In her place stood something sharper, harder. Not a victim, not a widow, not a mother in mourning. A weapon, forged from pain, tempered in fire, aimed with purpose. The world had forgotten her. Now it would remember. Forever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Check out the other videos on the channel. You'll find more stories worth your time. And if this one hit the mark, share it with someone who needs to see it.